Thank you for joining today's webinar. The session will begin in approximately 2 minutes. Thank you for joining today's webinar. The session will begin shortly. Thank you for joining today's session, which is entitled Deliver Tailored Mass Email Direct from SAP. Please note that your microphones are all muted, so if you have any questions, please use the Q&A at the bottom of the screen. We will pick up all the questions at the end of the presentation. We're going to get started now. So I'd like to hand it over to today's speaker, Chris Scott.
Thank you very much, Kate. And so welcome along to our fourth and final webinar of this series this summer. My name is Chris Scott, and once again I'm joined by Kate Terashenko, who's going to organise things and answer any questions we might have. In the previous webinars, I covered the introduction to Floe and the business case for implementing Floe, and then I went through step-in-step instructions on setting up SAP to use Floe for document output and for SAP workflow. If you haven't seen the previous webinars, they are available on demand, and hopefully we've already sent you the links to that content. So once again, today's session is all new content, and I won't be repeating anything from the previous sessions. I'm expecting this session to last around about 30 minutes plus time for questions and answers. So today we're going to focus on mass correspondence. That's effectively how we can perform mail merge from SAP. I'll show you how mailing lists can be enhanced with SAP master data in order to determine email content dynamically. I'm going to walk through step by step how to create an email with dynamic content so that generated emails are tailored for each recipient. Once again, I'll be performing live demos throughout, so you can see everything is real. And of course, with live demos, there's always the chance we might run into unforeseen difficulties. So bear with me if that kind of thing happens. So as I described previously, Floe is delivered as an API, that is to say, a function module which we can trigger from anywhere. In the main use cases, Floe is triggered either from an SAP workflow step or a print program, or indeed from the mass correspondence tool that is included as part of the product. Now, in all cases, the Floe API builds the email and passes it to the SAP communication service, business communication service, which in turn routes it to the outbound SMTP server. So today we're going to focus on the mass correspondence use case. So there are lots and lots of potential use cases. Weekly reports, for example, communication with suppliers, communication with employees, communication with other groups like pension holders, citizens, or many other recipient groups. I'm sure there isn't really a single use case that is the perfect fit for everyone, so I'm going to focus more on the technology rather than the particular use case. So hopefully you'll get ideas and see where this can add value in your own organizations. Let's start by looking at how it all works. So first of all, we need to determine a list of email addresses that the email will be sent to. And so I'll show a couple of different ways to do that. And then the Floe API is run separately for each email address, so we can add specific data in each particular email and also add in dynamic content for each particular email. And then the emails are sent as normal. So if there are 100 recipients on the list, then Floe is run 100 times. And all the user exits for all the business logic are run 100 times. So there could be 100 different emails, not the same email sent to 100 people. So let's begin by looking at how we can manage lists. And there, as I said, there are two ways of approaching this. The first method is to use the recipient list functionality in Floe. And you can build multiple different lists of email addresses and add in some data fields for each recipient. When you use these lists, you can use the standard Floe trigger program to send emails. The second method is to build your own trigger program, and then you can add your own selection logic for customers or suppliers, employees, or other business partners. And in order to build, in this way, you build up your own recipient email address list at runtime instead of having them in a fixed table. Now, regardless of how we build the recipient list, we've got the capability to tailor each email using business logic. And we use the Floe user exits to add that kind of logic. And there are several different approaches that we can take. Firstly, we could use the data user exit to determine some HTML styling in order to show or hide part of a block. This involves putting variables inside the HTML rather than in the content as content. So it's powerful, but it makes the content blocks more difficult to manage, i.e. you manage them as HTML instead of rich text blocks. Now for images, similarly, we can use a variable for the image path, so we can set it in the user exit. And that works fine, but it makes the blocks a little more difficult to maintain through Floe Email Builder because you don't see the image at design time. So secondly, we can edit the entire template using the email body user exit. This user exit provides us with the entire email body as a string so that we can perform search and replace actions in order to change logos, company names, and show or hide content. And thirdly, we can use the content block user exit to add or remove entire content blocks from the email. And this is by far the easiest approach, and so it's really the only one I recommend, and it's the one I'll demonstrate today. So I'm going to move on to the demonstrations shortly. I just want to begin with recipient list uses, and then move on to the master data selection with a custom program. So when we use recipient lists, there are in fact 6 fields available to us. First name, last name, and company as standard, and then we have 3 index fields. And I'm going to be focusing on these 3 index fields in the demonstration because we can use these fields in a number of different ways. In fact, all kinds of ways. I'm going to demonstrate 3. So firstly, we can put data inside them that we can include in the email. So that might be something like title or job title, something additional to first name, last name, and company. And secondly, we could put data in there that perhaps we don't show in the email, but we use to determine whether other content is included or excluded from the email. So we can kind of think of it like preferences. If a particular flag is set, then we include some extra information in the email. And thirdly, we can put a reference to another SAP object in the index field, like a customer, supplier, or employee number. This enables us to select more data that we can include in the email or use to determine whether to include or exclude particular content. So that's like a data hook to reach out and fetch some additional content. Because if we're using Floe, for example, to send customer newsletters, then we know stuff in SAP about customers. They're more than an email address to us. We know things like customer groups, language, country, etc., etc. Okay, so now I'll start the demonstrations. So starting with building up an email to show different use cases for those index fields. So I'm going to start off in Email Builder. There we go. Just refresh this page. Make that a bit easier to view. Okay. I've already set up a simple email for the purpose of this demo, DM3. And so we'll just look at what's inside here. In fact, it's made up of 4 different blocks. The first block, this header block here, I can see that it's a library block. It's inside the library. And so I can't edit it at this point in time. And in fact, the same goes for this banner. That's just been dragged in from the library, and indeed these social media icons. And then there's a paragraph that we've added here, a content paragraph, and just put in some simple text and some variables. And these variables are pre-delivered variables, and they link to those fields in the Floe recipient list. So let's quickly show that. So in the SAP standard menu here, I open cross-application components and then Floe, and then I can see this option to maintain recipient lists. So I'll take a look in here, and you can see I have a few. I'm just going to take a look at this A002 recipient list, and I've put myself in twice. And if I just rearrange these columns a bit, you'll see that I've got some different information. So these fields, first name, last name, company, and then index 1, 2, and 3, those fields are available to me as variables inside the email builder, fname, lname, company, etc. Also got the receiving email address. So it's a really simple email type just with these 4 blocks. So that's already built for me. And so I'll go ahead and just trigger Floe for this recipient list. And so I should get 2 emails delivered to me. So they're both going to me. So but I'll probably leave that session there and treat myself to a new one. And then back inside Floe, I'll choose this option, trigger mass correspondence email. So here I choose the email type, which we saw I'd called DEM3, and the recipient list. And I'm going to choose the option to send immediately and then just execute. And I can see a couple of emails were sent out. If I move to my Outlook, they've just arrived now. And so we can see this email here has some information from that recipient list. So we're using that index field here as some data. And so one, I've got favorite animal B, the other one snake, and indeed that's what I had inside the table here. So that's using the index field as a data source. So that's a very simple use case. Okay, so now I want to add some dynamic logic to this email. So I'm going to add a new block into the email type and drag something in from the library here. So that's as easy as doing that. I know my block number is in fact 82, and I'll just select this. So what we've got here is again, it's just a library block of text with an image in there. And what's important to me is the block ID, which is this Floe, and then the SAP number, and then this counter effectively. And so this is the block ID I'm going to use inside the user exit for my business logic. And in this case, I want to only include this block if the index 2 value is Y. And if I look at my data, I've put one of the has Y and one has N. So we add this logic inside a user exit. So again, now I go to a new session, go to the IMG, and open up general application functions and Floe. Now I'm going to maintain my email type user exits. So I navigate down to my email type, which is DEM3. I'm going to look at the content block, determination user exit. So here it's really simple. I've got an internal table of the various variables. I know I've got one variable called index2. So I'm reading that from the table. I'm setting it into a little variable here. I don't need to, but for this purpose I am. And I'm checking whether that is a Y or not. And if it doesn't equal Y, I'm going to delete that block 82 out of a list of the blocks. So this is a changing parameter of a list of all the blocks in the order that they will appear in the email. So it's pretty simple. Read an internal table and delete an entry from another internal table, and we're done. So that's already in place. So I can go back to my program to trigger mass output and just run it again. Okay, so I've got 2, so I should see 2 emails arrive after this spam. And so again, I've got 2. So this particular one hasn't changed at all for the cs@arch.co.uk. The other email type, in fact, that hasn't saved. So maybe I forgot to save my changes in the email builder. Now that's saved, we can try that again. That's the beauty of live demos for us. I might make mistakes. And we'll run that again. 2 emails have gone. Let's clean this up a bit. And the 2 new ones have arrived. And that one has no extra paragraph, and this second one has the paragraph in. So it's the same email type, but now I've started adding some dynamic content for different recipients. Okay. So now we'll look at the third use of this index field, where I'm going to put in a reference, a hook to another object. And in this case, it's going to be a customer. So if I look back at my data, I've used the index 3 field as a reference to a customer master. So if I take a look at this customer master record, again, let's have a new session for that. And just display the customer. What I'm going to do is look at this field in the control data called train station. That's the field I'm interested in, and a quick look at the technical details on this tells me that it's KNA1 Barnes. That's the field that I'm interested in, the train station for this customer. So I'm going to go back to the email builder and add in another block that I've prepared in the library. This time I'm going to be looking for block 85. And so here I want to only include this block if the train station is Waterloo. This time I'll remember to save the email type, so that's saved. And we'll go and take a look at the user exit. So further down the same block determination user exit, what I'm going to do is read the variable table, looking for a variable called station, and then check is this equal to Waterloo or not, and in which case delete this new block 85 that I've added in if it's not equal to Waterloo. Of course, at this point, I've not yet defined this variable station. I do that in a different user exit. I do that in my data user exit. So this logic is exactly the same as before. I'm just picking up, reading something from the variable table, and then showing or hiding some information. In the data user exit is where I can fill that station variable. And so I start off by reading the index 3 variable and assigning that to a variable, and this move adds the leading zeros so that I can then select from the custom master and then take the train station field and fill it into a new variable called station. So it's all dead easy, very, very simple. Adding a row to an internal table and doing a single select using the value that I've read from the index field. So that's all in place. I can now go and test this. So I go back to my trigger program, and I just execute that once more. Third time, I go back to my Outlook, and 2 more have arrived. And we can see the first one here. I can see that the first block is in there, but not the second. I look at the second email, and now I can see this new block is in there, but not the first block. So again, that one email type is giving me 2 different sets of content inside the body of the email for the different recipient. Okay. Okay, so we saw with the recipient list method there were three pieces of the jigsaw. Actually, the recipient list itself, the list of and the data that we store inside that, the template, the email template that we build in Email Builder, and then the business logic that we add in the user exits. And in the next demo is going to be an example where we build the list at runtime by selecting master data records instead of using a pre-built list. So in this second case, two of these three pieces of the jigsaw are exactly the same. So the template builder, exactly the same. The logic in the user exit, exactly the same. But where the list comes from, it's going to be dynamic. So we need an ABAP program to do that selection. So let's take a look at building one of these ABAP programs. So in fact, as a developer, what we do is we take this program, the standard deliver program, and just copy it, clone it, and then change the selection screen. So of course, I've already done that earlier, and I've got a program here, and most of this is exactly the same as the deliver program. I've added in a selection screen block, looking for the vendor number, country, company code, purchase organization, and I think left the rest. I then add some selection, so I'm selecting using those select options from the vendor table. In fact, not just that vendor table, 3 different vendor tables, in order to find the email address and a bunch of other fields, and add all that to an internal table. So that's my selection, and then I loop at the table where I found an email address in this case, and then basically call Floe each time for each email address that I found in the table, and then have some results. So it's a pretty simple report, not very long at all. Just doing some selections and then triggering the Floe API for each selection, each entry I find. Okay, so that's the program I'm going to run. And now I need an email type. So back to Email Builder. Again, I've got one lined up. Supplier terms newsletter. And this consists of a header block and just a simple dear name, and 3 different paragraphs, and then kind of a signature and banner and the social media icons. So a lot of this is very similar. It's just we've got these 3 different blocks in here, and so again, I need to look at the block ID in order to decide am I going to include or exclude these various different blocks each time. So the logic I'm going to include is to first of all change this header block for a particular purchase organization. So if I find a particular purchase order organization, I don't show this header block in green. In fact, I replace that with another one from the library. I'll just show you here. I replace it with basically, I replace 72 with 71 in order to get a yellow banner at the top there. So that's the first piece of logic. So I'm going to be looking for the vendor purchase organization. And then the second piece of logic I'm going to do is to include or exclude this particular paragraph, this invitation to the Partner Summit, based on the supplier ABC code. So only A-rated suppliers are going to get invited to this summit, and otherwise this paragraph won't appear. So I've got my my email type all really dead easy. In fact, there's only one variable inside there. Everything else is static text. Now I go to back to the user exit area, I'm going to choose my supplier terms newsletter email type, and I go to the block determination user exit. So in here, it looks exactly the same as before. I've got two pieces of logic. First of all, I'm going to look for the purchase organization, which is stored in a variable, and we'll see that in the other user exit. And if that purchase organization is equal to 5, then I read my HTML block list, the content block list, looking for block 72, and replace it with 71. The second piece of logic, I'm looking for ABC indicator, and if it's not equal to A, then I read that table again and delete the particular row, and it's row 76. It's as I say, it's exactly the same ABAP. In this particular case, I did a read and delete. In the previous one, I went straight to the delete with a where clause in there. But as you can see, pretty easy stuff. Of course, we do need to fill this EKORG and LFABC. We can do that in two different places. We could either do that in the calling program, or and pass it into to Floe, or we can do that from the Floe user exit. So let's have a quick look back at the program again. Is that here? Yep. And so I'm selecting all these things, and so in fact I can see that I'm selecting the ABC indicator here, and so on my vendor list table, I'm passing in the purchase organization and the ABC indicator. So I'm filling those fields in the front end here, in the calling program. I'm pushing those into as variables using this this method that basically takes the internal table and it's a structure in this particular case, and translates everything to variables. This means I don't need to do anything in the data user exit. All those fields are available to me as variables with those field names. So I can refer directly to the ZSABE or the EKORG as we saw in that in this user exit here, EKORG or LFABC. So we'll give that a go now. I'll execute this program. And I've got a variant to speed things along. In fact, I'm just saying, look for the company code 1000. There aren't that many suppliers in there. And then the email type is what I've set up. I'm saying user communication language. I could just as easily read that communication language from the supplier if I so wished, and then have various different language versions of that template. So in this case, I'm saying always English, and send immediately. So we can see the whole bunch of suppliers in here had no email address, and a few did, including 6 that had me. So I can go and expect to see 6 different emails now arrive in my inbox. See, 1 has arrived, and there are the others arriving, and so now depending upon that those 2 fields, whether the purchase organization is 5, whether the ABC indicator is A, then we'll see different content in this email arriving. So this particular one didn't have the invitation. This one didn't, and this one didn't. So we'll see some. This one now has a different purchase organization, but wasn't an didn't have the ABC indicator set, and then this one did have the ABC indicator set and the purchase order 5. So you can see that now I'm just selecting, rather than managing a particular list of email addresses, I'm pulling this out of the SAP system and then giving tailored emails to different recipients based on data inside the SAP system. Okay, so that brings me to the end of today's demonstration. So I'd like to remind you that we'd love you to try Floe for yourself. We've got a system that you can access via the web and play with Floe Email Builder, create your own email types. And in that case, there's nothing to install because it's not on your system. We just provide you with a user and logon details, and away you go. And there's a form on the Floe website through which you can request access. Another option is to install the software on your own SAP system for a 60-day free trial, and we're happy for you to use the product however you want, even in your production system. There's a request form on the website. Just fill that in, and we send you the software, installation guide, and everything you need to get going. So I will send everyone a link to see this webinar on demand as soon as it's published in the next day or two. And of course, there is lots of information on the Floe website, www.floe.com. And so that's it, the formal presentation over. I'll hand back over to Kate to review any questions.
Thank you, Chris. There's a question from Tony here. Is the number of email recipients limited?
No. I know, obviously, there are cloud-based marketing solutions that out there that charge you depending upon the size of the list. But I mean, Floe isn't a marketing solution. Obviously, there's an overlap of functionality. But it's just one fixed rate for the software, so unlimited number of lists, number of emails. So you could send millions of emails every day and you wouldn't pay any more.
Thank you. And Jane here from marketing department is asking, how does it compare to MailChimp?
Well, so MailChimp is one of many of these cloud-based marketing solutions. So they're really good for things like newsletters and where you're basically talking to customers or prospects, if you like, because they're tracking. They've got this extra tracking of who's clicked what. Basically, once we've sent the email out of SAP, then any kind of buttons or clicks or anything we've got on there, we're not seeing any tracking information back in SAP. That's not to say that you couldn't point this at an external email management system that could add that tracking to links so that you could get some of your own statistics back. But it's not designed to be one of those marketing type products. Now, of course, on the flip side, Floe has all this dynamic ability to add this business logic in, so that rather than everybody getting the same email, everybody can get a different email. So to a degree, it's apples and pears. Obviously, there are use cases that overlap, but we're not trying to be everything that those marketing products are. Where this is more kind of business communication, where they're real contacts rather than kind of a prospecting exercise.
Thank you, Chris. Well, I think that brings us to the end of the session today. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us, and we hope you'll join again next time. Goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.